Hello there, World of Tankers. Welcome to the channel. Hopefully all of you are doing well out there. I'm of course your host, Droodles Blitz, and in today's video, we're going to be doing another opinionated one on the FV217 Badger and some of the other tier 10 collectors in World of Tanks Blitz. Now the Badger is a vehicle that I really wanted to like this was a vehicle that I spent a crazy amount of money on when it first came into the game to get in crates, because I just love the concept of this tank. It's this frontline tank destroyer, has great damage per minute. It seems like it had great aiming values, dispersion. Not only that, it had great frontal armor. So this was a tank that you could really work most positions where other heavies would kind of fall apart, and you'd be able to just rip into enemy opponents getting out the high damage games. And while occasionally you can get a game out like that, if you're on mines, yeah, this tank is pretty brutal. But at the same time, there's a lot of issues with this tank, and in fact, I would rate this tank so far down, I would say that this tank and the other British tier 10 tank destroyer, the FV217 are possibly the two worst vehicles to win currently in World of Tanks Blitz with, and that's because of the current meta. You've got a lot of light tanks. First of all, you got the Vickers Light, which just came out. Not only that, but you got the Sheridan. Then you go into the medium tanks that have gotten non-stop buffed over and over. So medium tanks, you got the 121, the 62A, the STV1. Even the E50M was buffed not too long ago. So when you play this vehicle, the issue is that a lot of these tanks have now crazy damage per minute. And now the heavy tanks got a hit point buff, of course, so now the heavy tanks have a lot more hit points to deal. So while you may have a lot of DPM, of course heavy tanks can just trade with you. An E100 will load heat and pretty much pack right through your frontal armor. There's a lot of issues I have with this vehicle, and I wish Wargaming did make this a tech tree tank, because if it was a tech tree vehicle, it would most likely be balanced out. That's of course how tech tree tanks work. If the Kronwagen, when it comes into the game, overperforms or underperforms, Wargaming is probably going to balance it out, and that's what I wish does happen to collector vehicles. But when you look at collectors, let's talk about ones that probably need buffs. So first of all, we got the 111.5A. Well, I do absolutely love the tank. I still will agree that it probably needs a little bit of maybe a hull buff, maybe a bit of DPM. It definitely is a little bit worse, and, you know, like an IS-4 is pretty much better than a 5A in almost every single attribute. Then you've got vehicles like the AMX-30B. It's pretty much just like a worse Leopard now, or a worse STB-1. There's a lot of tanks that currently in Blitz just really for collectors don't really do the great job. But I will say, against an IS-7, which you can see I am currently, this tank is going to be fantastic, because of course an IS-7 has terrible standard penetration. Well, it's not actually bad standard pen, it's the premium pen that is truly awful, and what that means is I'm not too worried about him, because he's going to have to penetrate me. Now, we do have the 183 off to the side, which, yeah, it is a 183. I don't want to necessarily play with that. The 183, in fact, just hit my teammate for a lot of HP, not necessarily something I like to see. But here we go, we got the IS-7, nice little tap right in the side of him here. Now, of course, the enemy 183 is right off to the side as well, but let's see if we can get one more nice tap right into the IS-7. So you can see, in frontline positions, this gun works great. In fact, I'm just very easily ripping into this IS-7, just tapping shell after shell into him. We got to back up before that 183 hits me, but there you go. We already got one vehicle taken out in the form of the IS-7, which is always a great thing going for me. We've also got the Leopard here. Let's see. Okay, I see how it is. Wargaming bouncing off the frontal armor of a Leopard. Now, that's actually very rare, because when you think about it, this gun has great penetration values going for it. I think it's actually sitting at like, I think it's about 280 millimeters on the standard. That's a pretty impressive value. But one thing you'll notice about this tank that is not impressive, oof, that's gotta hurt, but one thing you'll notice that is not impressive is the on-movement dispersion. And it's quite odd that the on-movement dispersion is bad, because you'd expect, of course, a tier 10 tank destroyer, especially a very slow one at that, to be very accurate on the move, because you got to pull up. You don't want people to aim at your weak spots, so you expect it to pull up, have a good accurate gun, and back into cover. Now, that guy just got yeeted and deleted, but let's at least get a nice tap into that 183. I'm actually very surprised that shot hit. You could see how inaccurate the gun is, and it's a little bit deceiving, because on paper the gun looks fantastic. The dispersion is 0.299, which of course is one of the better values for a tier 10 TD. Not only is the dispersion great, but the tank also has good aiming time, 3.4 seconds. All the values going for the gun on paper are great, but when you turn the tank, you can see that that gun blooms massively, and it's a real big issue, because every time you're trying to deal with medium tanks, like that Leopard, the gun really doesn't go where you want it to. But the biggest issue I have with the Badger is the frontal armor. This tank is supposed to be a vehicle that when you put it in a hull down position, it's supposed to be a beast, but the issue is that an IS-4 currently in the meta, if you were to load calibrated and penetrate it with heat, well, you penetrate it about 95% of the time, because while the frontal armor is good on the tank, when you're using gun depression, those boobs on the vehicle are always going to be flat, because of course they're already pretty much flat. You can't make angled armor You can't make flat armor that's already flat pretty well angled, even when using your 10 degrees. So it's only sitting at about, I would say, 350 millimeters thick, and that's with heat, so about 320 with your AP shells because of course, shell normalization. So the issue with the Badger is the frontal armor is very, very weak to penetrate. Pretty much all tier 10 tank destroyers, like the 183, would easily cut right through the frontal armor, even with standard shells in a gun depression position. But the issue is when I'm going up against a tier 10 heavy tank, like the IS-4 or the E100, that you're supposed to be able to fight, and they just penetrate right through your frontal armor, and they've got more hit points than you, and they've got a lot of other things going for it. And there you go. You can see again that gun there, just it's not accurate. Why isn't this tank accurate? Look how inaccurate that gun is on the move. Like, again, you'd expect it to be an accurate tank destroyer because it doesn't have the best lower plate. Actually, I will say the lower plate on this tank is quite impressive, but like right now I'm expecting to be penned. Oh ho ho. Ooh, I got no clue where he bounced it, but that was a really bad shot fired from the enemy 183 there. So yeah, we're just going to not talk about that. I'm going to try and get out of there. But yeah, normally I will say, and I pretty much expected to be penned there. But again, you can see there that the gun really isn't super accurate on the move. Something you'd really expect out of a tier 10 TD isn't really coming out of a tier 10 TD. But thankfully, we are actually doing a decent job where we're at, getting out some nice shots. We've got the Jagdpanzer right out in the side here. And actually, I'm very tempted just to kind of push on this Jag because I do have gun depression, of course. I can just easily kind of tap one shell into the Jag. Oof, yep, there you go. You can see the gun kind of not liking me there. But I'm not super worried about this Jag, of course, because he has to work a lot worse gun depression position than I do. I can just easily kind of use my gun depression here, tap him, and then back up. But again, this Jag can easily tap me right through the frontal armor. So I've got to be very careful because I don't want to be hit by this Jag. So this is just a really sketchy situation for me right now. I don't want to be hit by that Jag, but at the same time, I kind of want to keep shooting him. So here we go. Let's see if we can get... I still can't pen him with AP. That shell ricocheted off, unfortunately, but it looks like our team's going to win this either way. So I'm just going to kind of... Let's see if we can get a shot into the boob. There we go. Nice tap, and the heat shell did bounce perfectly. Okay, so you know what? As much as I'm giving the Badger a bunch of hate, it's actually seeming to work currently, which is quite rare. And I'm actually going to out-reload this Jag, if I'm not mistaken, because of course we do have a great DPM as it is. So let's just load a premium shell, finish off the Jag. So these two games here worked pretty well. And that's of course because the enemy team, as you'll notice, didn't really do a great job. It was a 6-0 battle. And I've been playing the Badger for quite a bit. I actually had a big rant with my Void buddies. I was playing the tank, and the issue with the current meta is, you know, this game here, we didn't really have any Sheridans on the enemy team. We didn't really have any crazy mediums. Our team was able to win on the medium side, but when your team loses on the medium side, and yes, let's just say there's 2 medium tanks aiming at your Badger, well, you're pretty much instantly rushed in the tank, and it didn't really show it there, but it's pretty much taken apart every single time. A Sheridan can literally penetrate the frontal armor of a Badger with missiles. Now, that's a little bit annoying when, you know, you can just kind of get tapped and the Sheridan can just even face hug you and pen you with missiles. It is a little bit of an annoying thing. And while these two games were very nice in the Badger, there's definitely a lot of issues that I feel that shouldn't really be currently in the tier 10 meta. I think all tier 10 tanks should be balanced. And the Badger, it's just not balanced. It's just like all the other tier 10 collectors in the game. There's a handful of collectors. Of course, the T22 medium is an overpowered tank, but there's tanks like the Super Conqueror, which I actually give Wargaming credit. They are buffing the Mantlet, which was a big issue. They're not owning up to it being buffed. I hope they do in their video, but they didn't say that the Mantlet was buffed on the tank. But the AMX 30B is pretty much just a worse STB. It's got worse upper plate armor. It's got a worse turret. It's got a big cupola sticking out. And while it does have that mobility advantage, and I do enjoy that mobility advantage, it doesn't really have the accuracy. It doesn't have the DPM to fight the STB. The T95E6 is another vehicle where it is a good tank. Again, if you know how to play it, it's a great tank fighting mediums, but it shouldn't have that cupola on it. There's so many vehicles currently in the collector class at tier 10 that Wargaming should buff, but for some reason they don't. So I figured, you know what, in today's video, I'm going to talk about the Badger, and I'm going to tell you what I personally think should be buffed on it. So I think that the frontal armor on a Badger should be impervious to shells coming at it, not the frontal lower plate. I think the lower plate is fine where it is. It's about 220 millimeters thick, which is actually pretty good. But that means that most tier 10s and pretty much all tier 9s are going to overmatch the lower plate. But the upper plate on this tank, I say, should be impenetrable to all tier 10 heavies in the game because you're supposed to be able to fight heavy tanks. And what's the point of being able to fight fight heavies, if they just spam HE at you or they penetrate you with premium, it should be a very, very hard penetration. Maybe a little bit of a weak spot on the front, but in my opinion, the Badger should be very, very hard to penetrate when aiming at frontally, because you saw those two games, the Badger worked well, because it did the only thing well that it's meant to do. The Badger is a frontline tank that only does well if your team does well. Let's say I was pushing my Badger heavy, and I don't know, I ran into two heavy tanks, and my heavies decided to die. Well, I'm pretty much screwed, because what's going to happen is they're easily going to not only outtrade me, but they'll just push on me. The Badger has absolutely no mobility. The traverse speed on this tank is 29.4. Now, to give you a comparison on how bad that is, if we were to go pull out, let's say, I don't know, the VK72. Let's see what the VK72's traverse speed is. So my Badger turns almost the same speed as a German Super Heavy, the VK72 on traverse. Definitely not something that's very good. That means that all medium tanks can easily flank you. The tracks are very weak on this tank. It's pretty much built on like a 2 and 5B chassis, and then it's just kind of well armored all around. The tracks are thicker, but I really wish that Wargaming would show some love to tanks like the Badger. It's one long thing that I will always argue. This tank needs some love. One of the other things I would say that if they don't buff the armor is the gun dispersion. As I said, the gun looks like it has great dispersion values going for it. You know, you'd think, hey, the gun's got great DPM, it's got great aiming time, it's got good dispersion 0.299, and I'm even running the dispersion buff 0.269, means that you really shouldn't miss your shots. But as you noticed, those games, as soon as you turn the tank, it massively blooms. And the issue with that is, let's say I'm working a map like Mines. Now, I know that the tank destroyers on the Mines map are easily going to penetrate me right with heat shells, so I got to be very careful, pull up, snap my shot, and back up. But the issue with that is when you're driving this tank and you've got to pull up really quickly and snap your shell, well, your gun that was not correct English there, but your gun just magically goes max dispersion and it can't hit anything. You'll shoot at the lower plate of an E100 and it'll completely miss and dunk into the dirt. And any Badger owners out there know that it is a very frustrating thing when that happens. So I personally think that this tank needs a buff. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below, but I'm going to start posting videos like this where I'm going to post opinionated videos where I think buffs should happen to tier 10 vehicles. You know, like the 5A, it should have a little bit maybe better frontal armor. I think it's pretty balanced where it is, but it definitely doesn't really stand a chance against the IS-4. The IS-7, in my opinion, needs a little bit of a buff. So let me know if you guys want to hear my personal opinions on what should be buffed and nerfed in World of Tanks Blitz, what I would personally do, as well with some live commentary and gameplay, because I think that'd actually be a really fun video. But of course, if you enjoyed today's video and you want to see more like it, please make sure to smash that subscribe button down below. But other than that, hope you're all doing well out there. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.